Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining our online seminar this morning, specifically focusing on TIE's Living Lab and how we are enabling the adoption of modern methods of construction through the development of an IICC event brief. Now, that sounds quite technical, so let's go back a step and remind ourselves why we're here. Basically, transport infrastructure needs to modernise as other sectors have modernised. We need to disrupt ourselves before somebody else disrupts us. And the TIE's Living Lab project was an attempt to accelerate that with a series of partners and some investment from government, investment from the partners to try and move us forward in a range of ways. And it's no accident that we've started with the IICC Intelligent Infrastructure Control Centre, because it's absolutely fundamental. The approach is fundamental to how we modernise the delivery of our activities. So I am delighted to introduce our panel today to help us through this. We'll be first hearing from Charlie Davies of Costain, who has been a consistent and energetic pursuer of this question and is exactly the right person to be briefing you on it. And then we have our two arm's length bodies, as DFT calls them, the clients, as many of us call them, who are there to contextualize, ask questions, challenge, support, all of those things. And basically make sure that Charlie has to really pull out of the bag all the relevant facts for you. So we've got Matthew from East West Rail. The full bios are in the back section of the report. Secondly, we have Paul Judge from TfL. So let me say something about Matthew first. Matthew's the head of cost within East West Rail, and particularly looks at the whole life cost and cost management. He's worked on a range of key projects, but he's really here to help us understand the money side of things. Paul is one of the leading lights in the whole modernisation of transport infrastructure. He's project director in TfL's Capital Directorate and is working on some very exciting projects, particularly the Piccadilly line upgrade. So nobody better than Matthew and Paul to give us the context and some challenge. To our participants, thank you again. You can ask questions and use the chat function throughout the morning, and our conference team will make sure that those are presented to us. We'll have a 20-minute input from Charlie, and then we're just going to throw it open after that. So please take part, challenge, ask questions, stick your hand up or do it through the chat. We'll cope either way, I'm sure. So without any further hanging around, please can we hear from Charlie? So Charlie is Strategic Growth Manager at Costain. Costain are a very forward-thinking Tier 1 who have really been embracing the digital revolution. This is just one of a number of things that they are doing. Charlie has been really taking a client perspective, which is something the Tier 1s are occasionally accused of not doing. So really responding to that challenge and how an integral digital platform can help drive more efficient and greener delivery of infrastructure. Now, everybody on the call will be aware it's World Earth Day. Now, we all understand the importance of the environmental aspects, and that's been something that we have been focusing on, as well as cost, throughout Living Lab, and I'm sure Charlie will say something on it. But as someone who sees a number of the projects, I think there's some quite exciting carbon dimension to it. And we're all learning together, aren't we, in that space? But Charlie, over to you. Thank you for your input.
Thank you, Neil, and a really nice introduction, actually, which is always good to get going with. So yeah, I'm going to talk about very much a digital and data element in terms of the Talliss Living Lab. So really around how do we prove the business cases for adopting modern methods of construction and realize efficiencies very quickly to improve ways of working through the tools that we have at our disposal. And to sort of set the scene, we very much have looked across other industry verticals, so the likes of the finance sector, manufacturing, to really understand where best practices and how we can transfer that into our industry around infrastructure and how we get better at delivering infrastructure across the board. So just before sort of diving into the content, just sort of food for thought, not ones really to answer, but in terms of when we look at sort of effective portfolio management across lots of different projects, so £1 billion plus portfolios, we then go down into sort of the minute detail of delivering a footbridge, for instance, which the Living Lab is looking at. But then we have to come back up to that sort of macro scale, and some of the sort of challenge questions that we started with when looking at this intelligent infrastructure control center were very much around how can we achieve and realize efficiencies, whatever it may be, very quickly. And these sort of questions are there to sort of prompt, are you able to look at your portfolio to assess things like where's best practice, where's innovation bringing new efficiencies to my projects and programs, what's my current position on carbon emissions, and other things like what's the well-being like across my workforce. Well, using the digital tools, the innovative data processing methods that we're using within the Intelligent Infrastructure Control Center, can we make that much more accessible? And these sort of in under 5 seconds, in one day, a lot, not maybe after a report after 6 months or something like that. It's very much around, the sort of latency to reporting and having that live real-time environment to make faster, more informed, data-driven decisions. So just a bit of food for thought there. So just to sort of set the scene, we always need a challenge statement, a mission statement to sort of say why we need to do something, and really looking at why did we go after this solution? Why Costain and also the University of West England, alongside other partners as well, technology partner SAP and delivery partner Deloitte. Why do we want to be part of this challenge? And really, it's looking at industry challenges that are recognised widely. So I haven't got enough time to look at all this data. I've got lots of reports. What do I actually need to look at to improve the way that we're working? My information is out of date now. I could have made that decision 6 months ago, and we could have seen this efficiency. And really, it's around sort of improving those decision goals in terms of the confidence in the decisions that are made, reducing bias. Also sort of data paralysis, so looking at a huge spreadsheet rather than looking at one point that you need to look at, and the technology highlighting that for you. And then speed of decisions as well, having, as I said before, reducing that latency. These were very recognised challenges, and this was very much part of the premise for this major part of the Living Lab. There's also sort of more recognisable ones around, we've still got quite a few paper-based processes in our industry, and a lot of businesses, arms length bodies, private businesses, the government bodies as well, they've invested in huge legacy IT infrastructures with lots of different applications across a huge estate, and really there's not really a sort of a single integrated hub to help that sort of decision power. Also, another part is traditionally IT projects, they take a long time, they can fail, a huge investment, and then sort of benefits don't realize quickly, and taking a different approach from a sort of a business change perspective is also something that we looked at in terms of the challenges within the context of delivering that. So big challenge statements, big industry unlockers, and I think in terms of the scope of the Living Lab, we wanted to start at a good area around productivity, efficiency, innovation, and really start to expand that and grow the Living Lab beyond this sort of this safe place to innovate, we call it. Neil mentioned, there's been investment here. It's how do we leverage that investment and grow this into the communities that we all work in on our day-to-day and improve practices across the board. So yeah, what is the solution? So the objectives that we set out when we started on this journey, I believe it was about 18 months ago, was really around how do we achieve better value for money across infrastructure projects and programs. So really bringing that productivity metric up. That was very much the premise for the business case for the project. How do we compare, what we benchmark, what we estimate with what's happening, what's been planned, up-to-date plans, and then what's actually being delivered. So can we look at sort of the different differentiators and understand the causes for that, so that when we go into the next project, big major program, we're not making the same mistakes, or we're unlocking those challenges moving forward. It's not sort of obsolete project, the next project. It's very much the learnings are continuously growing. And how do we help that process with live real-time data? So automation is really a step change, and how do we really keep that very light, but actually move towards sort of a very much cloud-based, automated, connected environment to sort of feed information into decision makers. And yeah, just understanding your portfolio performance. That's definitely something. If I go into say, I don't know, a car manufacturing company, they can tell me, I order my car and I know exactly where every part is along that process in real time, so I can go and look at that. Or, I'm tracking a package from Amazon, I can see where the guy is down the road, he's just about to come to my door. Whereas, we still have a high latency in terms of reporting in the infrastructure sector around, when is that track bed actually going to be installed? Is it installed? And what are the next stages for that? I think that's where the sort of the automation is the step change in that, and very much using sort of innovative data processes to do that. So instead of sort of creating a new sort of big data environment, the perfect data model that has everything in one place, it's very much sort of taking sort of the information that's needed to make a decision, very much starting with the user, to sort of speed up that process. I mentioned data paralysis being a key sort of challenge point, and sort of a lot of sort of digital twin is mentioned a lot in our industry, but actually there's still a lot of small steps we need to take to sort of achieve those bigger goals. And what we actually did was we looked at the finance sector and looked at how they're enabling secure access to lots of different databases to enable you to make the decision and say, I'm going to buy this thing through a well-known app. Can I do that in real time, but without having to bring all the data into one place to make that decision? It's actually saying it's just collecting the data from lots of different data sources to help that decision process in as light touch way as possible and secure way as possible. So yeah, and sort of aligning to sort of the government data and security standards, off-the-shelf technology, preparing for sort of trend forecasting and ensuring that we're building a resilient solution, but also learning from where success has been seen. These are all key sort of areas to make sure that we delivered something that is going to impact business performance and performance on these projects across industry. So we've got this sort of data hub, essentially. Some call it data meshing, data fabric, lots of different terms, but effectively it's this single source of truth within the Talliss Living Lab. So within the Talliss Living Lab, for those that don't know, we've got demonstrator projects, so real world physical things that are using modern methods of construction, so offsite manufacture, standard kit parts, to sort of demonstrate the power of doing something differently. And then we've also got, the historic data, what's happened in the past, so we can sort of compare benchmarks to see, is a new way of building a footbridge, is it seeing the sort of the 60-70% step change that we're requiring to improve business performance in the industry. And then linking that into other innovations, so advanced logistics, having sort of a single source of truth to an asset number, or being able to calculate your social value through sort of previous historic data aligned with the input data for new projects. Bringing that into one central hub to sort of have that user access to all of this is really where we sort of started in terms of this control environment. Control is key if we want to be more flexible, more agile as organizations. Data, information is absolutely key to have control, to then make decisions to go and do stuff, to invest in new areas or whatever it may be. We did a bit of innovation as well around being in a boardroom, accessing this through your voice, or being on a site. Is there sort of ways that we can make the system and the solution resilient? So just to sort of set why this is innovative, or taking a bit more of a leading light in terms of doing something a bit differently. Rather than looking at the data first, we actually looked at the users. So we defined user personas that, as you go through that decision-making process, at what information do I need to make this decision? And this very much gave us a sort of firm foundations to say, this is what we need to achieve, and these are all the tasks that we need to go through to achieve that. And we can sort of be very flexible to the user requirements and the stakeholders, so that adoption is high, and the barrier to digital technology is lowered because of that constant process of feedback. So if I just pick out one from here, the carbon is World Earth Day, as Neil mentioned, and the Carbon Manager, a really strong use case. There's lots of different carbon tools, calculators. There's a huge abundance of data around carbon, but in terms of being able to access that very quickly, very succinctly, to say, this is where I am on that reporting journey, or this is where I am, and I understand the impact that this change has made in our operations. This is very much a problem statement that we explored, and that actually did lead to a much wider project around carbon and carbon reporting, sort of showing the impact that the Living Lab has had, because without the Living Lab, that innovation, we wouldn't be unlocking new carbon reporting, sort of net zero acceleration sort of techniques that are going into the wider government sphere. So why are the carbon emissions on Project Y so high recently? The dashboard is responding and enabling me to understand that within a very fast time period, rather than having to do a study, bring all the data into one place, someone sifting through the data. We're using the technology to really speed up that process. In terms of the users that we sort of interfaced, we wanted to make sure that as a single source of truth, a single hub, that there's accessibility at all the layers. So there's different requirements at different layers. And in terms of the structure of the Living Lab and the structure of how we deliver UK infrastructure, especially in transportation, we have this governance layer at the top, DFT, and they want to understand the now, and very much the high level metrics. Where do I need to correct course, and how can I support improving the way that we're delivering infrastructure projects? In, say, a delivery manager, or say a project manager within National Highways as an example, or an ALB, there's more need around accessibility for audit, understanding your supply chain. The supply chain is huge. National Highways is, for instance, is one organization, but actually the supply chain at the interface is thousands of people, organizations. So there's a different requirement there. The granularity of what's needed to be known is increasing. And then if you go into the supply chain, that continues to increase. And there's different requirements around project performance, because there's commercial drivers that you need to drive a profit in that lower level. but also, you need to be delivering. So yeah, there's different requirements at different levels, and through the data techniques that we use, we're able to bring that into one hub and securely feed the data to the right audiences, just by using the best technology available to do that. So I'm not going to play this whole sort of video, but just to give a flavour of what that actually looks like, this is all in one place. This is the environment that's created. Carbon program commercials. This is a very much the sort of the landing page, the executive summary to say, where am I at this point in time? And this is all automated. It's all at near real time as possible, and very much it gives you that high level sort of landing page. So as a CEO of NSAR, you might log in and you might have a certain set of metrics that you want to see at that board level. I'm going to report on this, or CEO of Network Rail, whatever it may be. And very much, it's light touch. It's very easy to use, but you have the ability to dive into this, all of the different sort of subject areas, because of the sort of the live automated aspect of the platform. We're looking at carbon here. So we went through, I think it was, we had quite a few workshops with different users, what should we be looking at? And PAS 2080 was a sort of a key element in that, especially for transportation. And we defined sort of these metrics, these user metrics, to sort of say, what do we need to do? The data is anonymous on here, so don't read into it. But effectively, because of the power of the platform, we could connect up lots of different data sources into one place across a portfolio to understand carbon performance in real time across our projects and programs, and effectively sort of understanding the whole life performance around carbon using this control center approach, this sort of data, as light data as possible approach. Within 4 weeks, we were able to establish, a very succinct platform that, I can go in, I can really drill down into the data to understand where my pain points are, and say, well, we need to focus here, or this change that we made has realized this benefit. But then I can go back up to sort of the high level to sort of show that, I need to present that. I know the data, I trust the data behind it. I now need to present that up to a higher level. And very much the sort of the approach of connecting up all these different systems enabled us to bring that, centralize it, single source of truth, for enabling the decision-making process. So for instance, on here, you've got your baselines, your plan versus your actuals, and you're able to see sort of by project how performance is working, and it gives the opportunity. It's sort of breaking down these data silos. We're a very cottage industry. My project's here, your project's here. We're doing two different things. We should be sharing. We should be learning from each other, and effectively, the platform is enabling you to do that. So say, for instance, we use modern methods of construction for a footbridge, or automated design solutions for sort of your cable management in a bore of a tube or whatever it may be. You're able to learn from that instantly to say best practices here. We should be looking to move towards that. It's not an overnight thing, but it helps to make that decision on what sort of type of bridge you should be procuring, etc., etc. So yeah, I think let's just skip on. And the platform itself was very much an innovation, but technology, if you stand still, you're very much going to get left behind. So and it becomes out of date before you even sort of start using it in anger. So we did look at sort of innovation on innovation, and with a really good team at the University of West England, in their built environment team, we looked at how could we sort of make sure that it's sort of the Siri or the Alexa sort of approach around accessing information. So rather than looking for your favorite song on your music streaming channel, you're actually able to understand project performance on a national critical project, such as HS2 or Piccadilly line upgrade or something like that. through your voice. So imagine a boardroom scenario. You know, show me this. Well, the platform is able to say, well, I need to use this intelligence to go and find this bit of information, and you know, it can display it back to the user very quickly. So when we looked at say construction machinery usage, you know, you're able to ask a question, articulate a question, and it will bring up that information for you in an instant to say this is the answer to your question. So it's very much we're trying to ensure that they're resilient solutions, but also consolidating what we deliver through sort of the continuous improvement of the platform through the project. So yeah, it's a nice to have, but it sort of shows you know, the technology used is very much adaptable to the sort of the user cases that we devise. So connecting up lots of different data sources across lots of different areas. So say, for instance, social value, we were able to sort of connect up HR systems to survey systems to understand, you know, the well-being of a workforce, but also the employment figures around that. You know, how many full-time employees have we got? How many part-time employees? And how much value we're delivering to the local communities that we're working in. You know, there are benefits that are seen from that, and some of them that we've worked to look at is very much access to data, so siloed data. You know, some big figures here, but actually we very much look from the user perspective to say, well, how much information am I accessing in a much faster sort of manner to help that decision process? And one I quite like on here, well, actually there's two. One is the pace of innovation transfer, because we're breaking down these silos. But also when you go to your sort of CFO, and they can see a massive reduction in audit costs because the data is available, it's real time, it's structured, it's formatted, it's in the right sort of digestible format for the users. You know, 57% reduction in audit costs due to, you know, these automated data feeds. We work with our technology provider to sort of get to these figures. You know, that's a massive change, and the sort of case material behind these percentages is really compelling around using a different approach to data, a much more lightweight, agile approach, yeah, to delivering efficiency across a portfolio. This is an IT project. We can't get away from that, a digital sort of process, and sort of CIOs, this really sort of is key to sort of relate to. So, you know, reducing risk around transformation programs, reducing cost, and improving security. They're all sort of areas that we really looked at. And yeah, you know, this all supports the construction playbook. So data-driven decisions, minimizing rework, off-the-shelf technology, and modular. So the platform that we built is very modular. As you saw in the demo, with all the different sort of subject areas, you know, we can expand, we can contract very quickly with the sort of the approach that was taken, working within the Living Lab. So yeah, and you know, the key is we don't want it to be another, you know, software sales cycle. This is about developing solution together, so private and public very much working together and making the innovation accessible. It's not an IP fight, which is always a challenge whenever any transformation program is sort of undertaken. It's around off-the-shelf, accessible innovation to improve industry performance. So yeah, I think that concludes my presentation, and yeah, hopefully gives a good insight into what we've been doing over the last sort of 18 months. Yeah, I'll hand back to Neil.
Charlie, thank you so much for that actually very comprehensive, in a short space of time, introduction. There's questions coming in already from the participants, and thank you very much for that. But we're going to go first to Paul and then Matthew to make a few remarks and perhaps push Charlie a bit on some of the points he was making. So can I invite Paul to say something first?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And I think it's the piece that you said at the end, which kind of resonates most with me in terms of, ensuring that this is a success, which is how do we make sure this isn't just another software sales piece? And to me, it's kind of two things that I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about. One is, why should I take this piece of software versus another bit of software? What is the differentiator versus other things out there? And is it aligned to, the things that are important to me at the moment? You mentioned carbon, that's very important to me at the moment, but things like value for money, etc., are increasingly important. And what kind of insights will it give me around there? And the other thing is, clearly, the success of this will be dependent on the amount of data, good data, that we get in there that we're able to compare. So how do we make sure that, one, that the data's in there is the right data, and then secondly, how can we make sure that we have a kind of consistent stream of data? And I guess maybe just a kind of question to kick that off. I mean, as this is about benchmarking, I would be worried that, if there's a particular project that perhaps hasn't been successful for any of the particular outcomes, say a cost outcome or schedule outcome, that people may be dissuaded from providing the data in for fear it might, make them look good, wouldn't shine the right light. So clearly there's probably a cultural element here that we need to embed. How important do you think getting the culture right is before you look to push the kind of adoption of this tool? Or do you think these are things that can kind of happen side by side?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, Paul. I think it's definitely a process that should be side by side. So as you change the culture and then you change practices around sort of data management, you mentioned quality, are we using the right tools in a business to get the right data to feed into sort of an enterprise sort of reporting platform? They have to happen hand in hand. I think there is warming up to do with sort of people around sharing that data, but also realizing that you can prove a bias very quickly through the data, and people recognize that and they say, well, actually, maybe my opinion was not quite right on how I think we're performing, and then looking to how you can sort of improve that moving forward. It's really answering the what's in it for you, what's in it for me, as you sort of start to implement a platform sort of approach to that data management. So in that process, it's a bit of a journey that you've got to go on. The first part is definitely doing the benefits mapping. What is it for me? Am I going to look bad in this sort of, or are my projects going to look, like they're not performing? But actually, it's all about, well, if you are using the tool or you're using the data correctly, you can look to rectify project performance much faster. And then from then on, there's sort of a clear path to delivering that project, I don't know, on time, ahead of schedule, whatever it may be, in a sort of a consistent manner. I think it's definitely the stakeholder approach is really key, and I think that does come first to a point. But if you're doing all the stakeholder work first and then putting a platform in place, you've kind of missed the trick. If the stakeholders are developing that platform with you, realizing the benefits along that journey, then that adoption at the sort of the go live moment of that platform is much smoother. So yeah, I think it is hand in hand.
All right, thanks. And do you think that there is the potential for some of the insights that IICC might bring to be around lessons learned, so you can actually kind of compare two things and understand, well, clearly this is something that I might want to take on board to make sure that I'm closer to project A than I will be to project B.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's sort of the controlled access of it. So if you don't want people to see certain things, you can do that through the system. But if you want to be sharing, I don't know, it might be carbon performance. Everyone is very sort of aligned to say, we need to be collectively improving performance around carbon emissions across our projects. If you have that sort of that open data platform to be able to do that, it does sort of gamify it a bit to say, well, I could be doing better, but it also instigates, that we need to go and talk to those people to understand what they're doing better, so that I can start to look to implement that on my project to ensure that I'm sort of keeping with best practice moving forward. So yeah, definitely, I think it helps. Competition is good. I don't think it is competition. I think it's more recognizing best practice and improving collectively. The platform is able to do that. The other side, going back to that data quality point, is it almost becomes a diagnosis tool on how your data is across your organization, because when you plug in these feeds, you can say, well, that you're 90% there in terms of the data that can be shared. You need to make these 2 tweaks, and then you get the full power of the platform. I think that's a really valuable piece that at the moment is quite a manual process in terms of assessing that data quality. So definitely the insights that it provides enable that transfer of innovation. That's the absolute key.
So perhaps before Matt comes in, I mean, just keep it on the data point. So I guess the 2 things, the input and the output. So from an input point of view, how have you managed to kind of assure that this is an apples for apples type comparison as far as possible, and have you tested that? And then secondly, just going back to the point around things that are important to me and value for money, I'll come back to. Can value for money is slightly different to say what was cheaper, yeah? So how can the IICC give insights in terms of what are good value outcomes versus say what was cheaper between A and B?
Yeah, no, I think both really good questions. I think in terms of the sort of the apples with apples, it's a real common challenge that we're getting, and in terms of because we put the user first, it means that the data points required to deliver that are minimized. It's not we're taking 100 data points and we're trying to compare it to 100 data points in another organization or project. It's actually, it could be 4 or it could be 10. So the level of effort to sort of normalize and provide the data in a succinct format is reduced. But actually the level that you go into the data as well is also sort of an area that we've definitely sort of unlocked around, say for instance, everyone uses program planning tools on their projects, and P6 for instance is a common one, and different structures, different breakdown structures across different organizations. And what we were able to do was sort of look at the hierarchy sat within, look at some normalization techniques using the digital technologies, and we could compare apples with apples in terms of program performance. So that's a good example. And then another example is where when we look at construction machinery and we looked at more sort of IoT based data, there is a standard in play, and because we've sort of were working with suppliers around sort of telematics, so machine performance, there is a standard, and not everyone's adopting it, but the big players, the people that are winning a lot of work, are adopting it. And it meant that there was a clear sort of goal for people to win more work. If they're adopting this standard, there's a clear sort of driver to say, we should be reporting data in this way so that we can secure more work, to deliver more work for ALB1, for instance. And that bottom-up approach very much sort of came through when we looked at sort of construction machinery performance as well. So yeah, there's sort of, I think it's unlocked sort of 2 angles. So where there's a standard and best practice, people should be using it, a bit like PLAS 2080 as a management standard for carbon emissions. It helps sort of structure data as well. But also where there's a minimum subset that a minimum viable product that we can go after in terms of the data, because the user has said, well, I need this, and it takes 2 data points. It means that the level of effort to get your data into the right shape to report on is greatly reduced. So yeah, and then in terms of value for money, I think that's definitely something that's been really key in terms of how we quantify it. So traditionally, cost, finances, the program, that's where we've looked at it. And as you mentioned, cost it always comes down to the dollar bills. traditionally, but that's definitely changing. And from a cost point of view, the value for money is around the forecast. Am I going to hit my targets? And the sort of the predictive analytics capability of the platform enables you to understand that. But from a much more sort of social value, sort of an ESG point of view, in terms of your decarbonisation targets, am I going to hit my net zero targets? It gives the other sort of predictability, because you're taking a history of data, you're analysing it, and you're always adding to that analysis in real time. It's giving you much more certainty as you sort of go towards those targets, so net zero carbon, or delivering greater employment, greater full-time employment, say within a 20-mile radius of a project. You're able to use the predictive element to understand if the initiative, schemes or programs that you're implementing are helping you to achieve that.
So, thanks, Charlie. I'll probably hog the questions long enough. I've got a few more if we get time, but Neil, probably hand back to you. Thanks,
Paul. Great start. And Charlie, there's no rest for the wicked, and you must be quite wicked, because it's now Matthew's turn to pose you some questions. So have that water and be ready for Matthew.
Super. What an introduction. Thanks, Neil. I'm not going to be that evil, I don't think, Charlie. But I thought the content was really impressive, and thanks, Charlie, for that presentation and overview. Certainly, this is supporting moving the dial in terms of creating further digital platforms and informed analytics, and you're bringing in important aspects there about sustainability and social value. In terms of cost, there looks to be opportunities to use the platform and the data to inform programs on potential opportunities or cost pressures that could be encountered. So I'd like to ask a question firstly around this. How would you suggest that you would use this tool to assess the potential impact when setting a budget or when setting a funding envelope on programs or projects?
Yeah, and it's a common sort of challenge, isn't it? The uncertainty when we look at civil engineering, we put massive factors in when we're sort of estimating and costing up a project, and there's also sort of the bias. So optimism bias is a major cause for program overrun, program overspend, and bringing science to that, using the data more effectively to inform that process. So when we look at the loop, we're not just monitoring performance; it's coming back around. It's informing that budget setting, that investment process. The platform's very much part of that cycle. A good case is, so we looked at some data we actually looked at a Costain project on in terms of productivity, and we looked at the estimation, the planned and the actual program, and the costs associated. And we looked at one category, we looked at fencing. There was an estimation of X, and we were able to identify the discrepancy in terms of the overestimate or the underestimate through the platform to then inform costing up the next job. So, having that data in one place to compare it all in one place enabled us to look at that. Fencing, it seems like such a menial thing, but actually when you're looking at sort of factors of 100, 200% in terms of the difference, when you sort of amplify that up, it can cause a lot of you could be, when you look at that end goal, you can be 600-700% out on whatever you estimate. So I'm not saying they're the figures, because otherwise could be bad, but it's feeding back into that process to inform that estimation process.
And you've mentioned that fencing, there was a cost value engineering opportunity that you identified there. Do you list out what the potential enablers are to make that happen? So if you were to put some of this ideology into an estimate or a funded envelope, you also say these are the things that need to happen in order to enable that opportunity?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, it's very much the data saying, well, you need to go and assess this in this way, and at the moment it's being assessed wrong, and you need to do something different to make sure that it is more accurate. I think I wouldn't say we're sort of pulling out, you need to I don't know, you need to look at your meterage a bit differently or something like that. It's not explicitly giving you sort of the action, but it's giving you the information to go and make that action, and inform sort of where you're not quite accurate in terms of that estimation.
Okay, super. And you also then talked through carbon and social measures and analytics within that presentation. Is there an initial view or recommendations on how the tool can inform and assess that for organisations?
Yeah, so the carbon point is really pertinent. So in terms of a legacy of this program, a program was set up in terms of very specifically looking at carbon and joining up lots of carbon tools to help you get your data into a good position, but also understand where we are on the net zero journey across UK infrastructure. And what that's actually given the opportunity, because we've sort of aligned to standards, best practice, what that feeds back down is, in order to get the best out of your data, actually your management processes need to change to improve your carbon reduction, for instance, or just improve your reporting. And that brings a different structure in place. So yeah, absolutely, it's creating a framework centered around data to improve the way that you work and deliver sort of the net zero ambition through the platform. So it's rather than starting from zero, you're actually starting from where you want to be, and then you're sort of working backwards from that.
Sure. And does that tool also then enable you to start planning towards becoming net zero and building a roadmap and a pathway to get there with those analytics?
Yeah, absolutely. You can look at your carbon budgets and say, well, actually, I'm using X amount. I've got Y, Z, and whatever sort of left to have in that, so that I can achieve my goals. And it enables you to predict what you're going to hit within that carbon budget. Am I going to be over? Am I going to be under? And if I make this change, what am I going to be able to do? Or what do I need to do to ensure that I am hitting the carbon budget? So it gives you much more confidence around sort of decision. I'm going to build a new road or a new railway line. It's ensuring that it's informed rather than it's purely based on we have a lot of people here, there's a lot of congestion, we need to alleviate that congestion. It's helping you to consider these other aspects to ensure that it's a sustainable piece of infrastructure.
Yeah, sure. And Paul's asked a question there about like comparisons, so I won't dwell on my own question for that. But what I also wanted to ask then, you just touched there about new railways and highways. Do you feel that the data is more applicable to a particular industry or organisation? Do you think there's one part of the industry that could benefit from this, or is it across industry wide?
I mean, this has very much been focused around transport, and within that, rail has been a lot more easy to compare than across the different sort of ALBs than not compare, but sort of analyze apples with apples, because the apple types are very similar. But with the roads, there's still a lot of the same material compositions. So you can go from a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach depending on what you need to know. So planned against actual, that's really simple in terms of timeline, but actually meter squared a bridge deck, there are sort of similarities you can draw. I think in terms of the other industries, I think from an infrastructure perspective as a whole, because of the sort of the engineering data that's going in, the understanding of that, and sort of the not sort of going in with data overload, just pulling out the aspects that you need. It's building an asset that's really sort of key, and I think that's where it can be transferred. So I think so, and also the approach, is user-centric, agile, flexible, all of these sort of words that we hear a lot about these days. That's actually accelerating the timeline in sectors that need to change in how they deliver these IT projects.
Super. Similar to Paul, I do have some more questions, but I'll pause there and I'll hand it back to Neil to see if there's any questions that you want to take from our attendees, Neil, or if you have a question yourself.
Matthew, thank you. And there's some very brainy questions coming in from the delegates, so thank you for them. Please keep them coming. We're going to jump straight in, Charlie. your good friend Andy Gordon, Transport for London. How can the IICC support and enable the golden thread of product traceability information throughout product life cycle?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So I think there's sort of two aspects from that. So what we're trying to drive, and especially with the work that Lamina's done around advanced logistics within the Living Lab as well, is looking at an asset-based approach. So rather than looking at one big piece of infrastructure, it's very much looking at the nuts and bolts and having that traceability along that product life cycle. So from cradle to grave, you know where that's been, and you can sort of pick that out within one instance. I think we're building upon the intelligence that's been developed within that sort of an advanced logistics side, which I think is one of the webinars that's coming up. There's a nice plug, but it very much you can get that summary in terms of sort of going back to the carbon point as well. When we look at I don't know, a tunnel bore section, at the sort of the input phase or input sort of process step, the EPD, the environment product declaration, is put in at that point, and then you can look at that through the whole life, so the construction, the in use, and the end of life, and you can understand what is the impact that's having across all of those phases. But it needs to be standardized. There's loads of different sort of factors that you can put into that, and that's just a challenge that's definitely being unlocked. Once that challenge is unlocked, there's huge potential to go from cradle to grave with these infrastructure assets and be more informed when we plan. What are we going to do? And do we need to upgrade? Do we need to renew? Or do we need to build a new asset altogether to help alleviate? It could be an economic problem or a societal problem within the UK infrastructure sort of market. So yeah, I think it does. Yeah, but there's a bit of a journey around the data improving to enable that.
Okay, well, thank you, and that's a helpful example. I think that it's important for the audience to hear these kinds of examples, Charlie. So thank you for that. We've got there's one from IPA from Chasiso. How can we? This should be easier, Charlie, right? How can we get access to the platform?
Yeah, no, that's and I think that's always these innovation projects. It's always a good question if it's a successful innovation. So I'll take that as a compliment. Yeah. So in terms of there's different streams. So the IPA, for instance, are working with the DFT around benchmarking, around metrics, data, etc., and modern methods of construction within the Project Futures team. So they are a user within this, I think, because that is key. The public sector organisations are very much users that can, we can give logons to the platform. That's part of how we improve the platform. So I think within the scope of the Ties Living Lab, there's definitely sort of opportunity for that. In terms of the information available as well, it's not closed door of how we developed it or how we delivered it. So there's very much that information is available. I'm not saying that we're not the best at delivering that, because that's always a nice thing to be, but effectively, yeah, it is accessible, but also you can buy it. So you can go and get it off the shelf and implement it into your own business. So yeah, that's something that it's very easy to license. It's cloud-based. You can mobilize it, tomorrow. That's where, if you want to look at it for your own business, expand it as an innovation, that's something that is very, very easy to do as well.
I'm not going to ask the tabloid question of how much a license costs, because I'm sure you'll tell me it depends. So I'm not going to do that. But somebody else, I'm sure, will ask you. Please feel free to contact Charlie through us directly, so he can come and perhaps give you a more personalised demonstration of it. I'm sure he'd be up for that. Charlie, the Simon Pledger from RLB is I think building on this point. Is anyone tracking the use of the IICC through infrastructure public procurement to drive usage and data capture, or is this voluntary?
So at the moment it's voluntary. So as part of the Ties Living Lab, it's very much an innovation. You know, we're testing, can we do it? We're validating it as a tool for capturing innovation, bringing metrics around model methods of construction adoption. So say for instance, semi-automated plant or automated plant, you know, is the rollout of that improving the way that we're delivering earthworks? You know, these sort of use cases we're able to prove out through the platform, but actually within the scope of the Living Lab as an innovation, it's the next stage is very much, you know, how do we productionize? You know, how does this sort of become business as usual? And I think that's where very much the opportunity lies in terms of these sort of tracking the impact. I mean, we've developed some very detailed use cases around the impact, and but there's always opportunity to scale those up. So yeah.
Yeah, and the point of Living Lab is to prove the concept, isn't it? It's not to then make it mandatory tomorrow. That's not the game we're in. It's accelerating innovation. The use cases should speak for themselves, to be honest, shouldn't they? It is interesting to note that Dominic Cummings, remember him? He had a vision that there'd be a single dashboard somewhere in 10 or 11, probably 10 Downing Street, that would give us all this live data at any point. Now we're a bit away from that, I think, but my guess is that this will become less and less voluntary over time. But that's okay, because there's financial benefits for the users as well as for the client. So, and the planet. It's World Earth Day. Let's remember that. So thank you, Simon. Good question. Cameron Christie from the AMRC is asking. It's back to your point about licensing. I think you've answered that, actually. Let's just check. Will the platform become commercially available more generally? And if not, what needs to happen to enable this?
So yeah, it is commercially available now. We're working with tech providers to make it something that you can just purchase off their app stores. So whether it's SAP or another technology provider, you know, Google or AWS, whoever it may be, the combination that we've piloted to deliver the user requirements, we're very much sort of working to make sure that that is, you know, readily available. Anyone can use it. But yeah, no, it's very, in terms of commercial availability, the sort of the, you know, we can get you going tomorrow on it. That's the key part to it. So yeah, very much so.
Okay, there's more questions. Thank you for them, colleagues. I'm going to go to Greg Pitcher, who's asking, what's your ultimate ambition and/or the ultimate potential of this system?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And if we didn't have a business visionary who sort of started this, Tim Embley, our Director of Research and Innovation, and also Peter Brown, who's been leading Ties, we wouldn't sort of have started on this journey around delivering, or Dr. Peter Brown of Ties, you know, developing a platform. And in terms of that vision, Tim puts it quite aptly in terms of a spaceship. So it sits at this sort of level, productionized, and it's dipping into all of these data sources to inform the decision-making processes that we talked about at a large scale. So at the moment, it's very much, I wouldn't say it's small scale, but you know, you can push through a lot of data through the platform at the moment. But when we look at the scale of, say, the DFT's portfolio, you know, up to 600 billion over, you know, the next 5 years, you know, that's a huge scale of data information projects. And if we have one single source of truth for all of those projects, then that enables us to be more efficient in our decision-making process around delivering in UK infrastructure. I think when we look at the carbon sustainability question, that's definitely not a UK challenge. That's a global challenge. And if I'm being super visionary, especially thinking about Tim and his vision as well, there's absolute scope to say, this is a platform, say, for instance, when COP meet, or the various sort of UN SDGs, so the UN sort of councils, they have a view of their global journey to net zero carbon. So there's definitely a vision. I think it's a lot more. There's quite a few steps on the way, but I think the technology framework that we've implemented, we've always had that vision in mind. So it is scalable, it is flexible, it is adaptable to enable that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Tim is really a very inspiring visionary in this respect. Right, we're going to go into the detail a bit now. Charlie, hope you're ready for that. Simon Pledger, again from RLB, is asking for more specific data around the benefits, the impact benefits. So he uses the example here of percentage of use of tunnel form and innovations, or best practice in MMC more generally. So what kind of percentage improvements might we expect?
And so I think we're on a journey on that one, Simon, in terms of at the moment it's very much the data implies innovation. In terms of sort of material asset classes, that's something that is part of the platform. You can see that within the commercial and the program modules, so you can understand percentage use of tunnel form, that's metered, and you can see that within the platform, and that can lead to sort of understanding what's your most carbon intensive sort of activities within, I don't know, building a new railway. But in terms of it's highlighting best practice through the percentage improvements in performance for different areas, and that leads to investigation into the innovations. I think in terms of capturing those innovations, I think that's what we think is implied by the data, but also what we also are able to do is build up a database that captures innovation. So it almost becomes a portal to say we did this here and it relates to this this data point here. I think that's something that's definitely roadmap in terms of next phase developments for the platform. But the data is implying that best practice is being used, and it is helping to identify that. But actually, the sort of the more qualitative prose that goes around it, I don't know, we used 10 people instead of 12 people or whatever it may be. It's something that we're very much looking to improve in terms of the granularity of the data.
And Charlie, just to help you out a bit here, when we did the kind of a productivity review study, which partly led to Ty's Living Lab, we found that other sectors had gained a 4% reduction in unit costs from this kind of approach. Yeah, so 4% was actual unit cost savings. Now, you mentioned the 600 billion portfolio. 4% of 600 billion is quite a lot. Now, that's a leap, and that's still a potential figure in transport because we've not implemented it yet in the same way. But that's the point, isn't it? The point is to start to do that, and now, and we'll see the benefits. I'm going to come back to the panel in after one more question from the audience at this stage. I like this question from Matt Beth from Transport for London. Are we going to get less intelligent engineers, or in other words, the skill set of problem solving? Have we reduced the engineering problem solving ability here?
I don't think so. I think in the first instance, this is around performance reporting. So it's not necessarily doing the solutionizing. It's helping you to identify where a problem solving, sort of being an engineer, being a problem solver, a really step change has been identified, and being able to sort of take that across the portfolio. At the moment, we complete a project, we restart a new one, and none of the learnings or some of the learnings may come across, but the learnings aren't sort of succinctly transferred to that next project. So I think it's more we're reducing the amount of re-engineering rather than sort of saying that engineers aren't needed anymore because there's all the data's there and this is going to solve world peace. But it's not from that sense. It's ensuring that where the step changes are being realised, that is transferred across your portfolio.
Very tactful answer as well. I'm going to be a bit less tactful. If it reduces the number of engineers, that might be a good thing, because engineers are hugely expensive because we've got a skills shortage of engineers. But anyway, that's not really what you were suggesting. I think what you're hearing there from Charlie is it's more, it's somebody like Matthew who's got to deal with the optimism bias that Charlie mentioned earlier. It's a tool to help, and perhaps there'd be more investment in infrastructure if clients had more confidence, or funders had more confidence in the outcome. So the consistent overruns are cited as a reason for people not investing. So it might actually lead to more engineering if we had greater precision. Paul, would you like to come in at this moment?
Sure, thanks, Neil. So just a lot of the discussion actually has been around, we've been talking about, and I guess because you've got two arms at body reps on here, the benefits to the kind of client organization. But going back to the point we said earlier around, the more data, the better, is it envisaged that this is, going to touch all aspects of the supply chain, tier ones down to SMEs? And if so, how do we encourage them to get involved?
Yeah, so I think the Living Lab is a great use case for that. So in terms of we've worked, for instance, with the Ava footbridge, we've worked with Network Rail, we've worked with micro SMEs for them to say, this is how I need to be controlling delivery of a bridge span or whatever it may be in a good data format. So are we reporting correctly to ensure that we're securing more work with these massive organizations? So I think it's given, I sort of brushed on it before, it's given the right framework and guidance for the supply chain to be moving towards, to bring them up in terms of leveling up the supply chain in terms of sort of data management and data performance, pushing into the ALBs. That's not to say that some of the supply chains are fantastic at it, and we should be learning from them as well. So it can be a two-way street there. So yeah, I do think it touches on each of the levels, and ultimately, and this goes back to the vision point, the automation element, which is the step change, Paul, in terms of reporting. We spend so much of our lives reporting stuff, bringing data together, producing reports, and actually we want to remove that overhead so that we have that sort of that mind space to be innovating, to be problem solving, to be doing stuff better. And I think the supply chain can massively benefit from that as well. So, and hence why Costain, tier one contractor, doing digital projects and trying to promote innovation across the supply chain, helping with those learnings. I think that shows that the supply chain are willing and want to help sort of change that dynamic in terms of how we sort of interface at the different levels within the supply chain. And the ALBs are recognising that. A good example is Heathrow, when they were looking at procurement of Heathrow expansion. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but there is a pause on that because of sort of the environmental implications. But the contracting model that they looked to employ was very much not one big tier one contractor at the top. It was lots of different bodies, and if that's going to be a big data headache, a bit like Crossrail had lots of contracts and the data was a challenge, having the right frameworks enables everyone to be more efficient across the board. Hopefully that answers your question. That's quite a big question, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. That is a very important question. And Charlie, I think the sort of SME talking a different language from somebody further up the supply chain is a really important point as well. Matthew, I think you had a couple more things you wanted to ask.
Yeah, sure. So, and we've talked a bit there about the capital expenditure and those initial investment decisions. What's your view, Charlie, in terms of like operational expenditure costs? Can we actually go 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? Can we actually use that and help to maybe model future technologies? What's the capability of the system?
Yeah, so I think that's very much, we've started to explore that. The history of data is key to sort of ensure that you've got accuracy in those models looking sort of 20 years ahead. So around program, for instance, there's a lot of history of data. Everyone has to keep, I think it's 8 years or something. You've got to archive the data, and you can use that to train your models to do the sort of the predictive side. I think in sort of the newer areas around reporting, social value, the environment, biodiversity, for instance, there isn't that history to sort of make the more accurate models sort of looking ahead. But yeah, no, there's definitely the capability. I think it's really, it goes back to sort of these data frameworks. If at this point in time moving forward, we have a clear data framework for reporting and sort of managing projects to, that creates consistency, and the accuracy of those models just improves. We did a bit of a proof of concept around machine learning around that sort of that productivity. Am I going to hit my project endpoint? And the platform was able to sort of look at the prediction, and we actually verified that with the project because the timelines sort of sunk up nicely. But you could see where the sort of, as the data quality increased, the predictability of it reaching that endpoint and the prediction of when that's going to be increased as well. So I think it's something we want to explore further. But in terms of the capability of the platform, absolutely, it's there. It's used in finance, manufacturing to do that.
Super. And just one more question, Neil, if that's all right. In terms of we just kind of forward planning, do you foresee this tool being able to be used when projects or programs are looking at what potential procurement method they could be looking at, what contracting strategy they might want to do, how they're going to logistically deliver something? Is that what you envision the tool can enable as well?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the vision. There's different contracting structures being employed currently. So say, for instance, in national highways, you've got an alliance approach and you've got a sort of a partnership approach. These are two different approaches. You can identify, which is going to perform better. So I think that's going to inform your decision. Should an alliance approach be taken, or should a partnership, or whatever it may be? Or consortium approach. And then I think a good example. So on HS2, there's this logistics hub that's been employed, and it's all about coordinating all the rail movements, vehicle movements around these huge sites. We're recognising a step change there because of that logistics hub being used. We can recognise them with very low latency. We can then look to, every project moving forward needs a logistics hub, or every project of a certain size needs to use a logistics hub, because the data is proving that modern method is working.
Okay, super.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Charlie. There's a question from Kevin Tozer of Network Rail. It's a very interesting one. Kevin knows what he's talking about. It's a good one. So, Charlie, the platform seeks to measure and improve activities in the engineering, infrastructure, civil engineering space. Is there a plan for the platform to measure and display behaviours? And, because Project 13, which Kevin's very much a champion of, Construction Playbook, Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap, all talk about interfaces, relationships, behaviours, and a more modern style of working, where you don't just thump the table, as I remember from my youth on a building site. So presumably everyone agrees with that, which is why they're on this call. But then, it may not be in scope, but has that been but Kevin's really saying that's a hugely important factor in the modernisation of what we're doing. Have you got anything to say on that, Charlie?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides to it. So there's very much from a technical side, because it's one single integrated hub, you can look in at the back end and say who's using it, how much they're using it, and when are they using it, in what scenarios. So there's a very sort of binary approach to look at that. Another part of the platform, which I didn't actually show today, was the survey capability. So automated pulse. So one of the questions that I set at the start was, can you understand the well-being of your workforce? You're able to, bring that in a structured format to say, I'm not happy with my line manager, or I don't like working with Neil because he's not doing this, or something like that. You're able to bring that into the platform through the technology.
Yeah. So, but I think what Kevin might be saying is it would be interesting to note if we were able to correlate between some of the cost data that Matthew's been pushing you on, and then if there was a kind of a way of it's hard to measure relationship type activity, but the correlations would be interesting. Presumably, we would expect greater collaboration leads to less rework, for example.
Yeah. I think it's something to explore. I know, actually, from a Costain point of view, we have our behavioural science team, and they have sort of made those links. I think we were first to do it across on the A14 with Balfour Beatty and I can't remember our other partner, Skanska on there. We were able to link business improvement or project performance improvement to sort of the behavioural changes that are made. So, I think there's something definitely to explore.
Yeah, and so behavioural science is in your mind. It sounds like at this moment in time, you would take from the IICC and then do a separate exercise. It's not all in the dashboard, as it were.
Yeah,
which is absolutely fine at this stage. Kevin, thank you for that question. Okay, there's time for one more from Paul or Matthew, and then I'll sum up and we'll close. Paul, anything else you want to ask or say?
Sure, I might just sneak in two really quickly. But the first one is and hopefully it's a really simple one. But you talked about consistency, and from a reporting point of view, does this have a very easy functionality where you can spit out a dashboard report, or does it have the opportunity to interface into something like Power BI?
Yeah, so from a sort of the main point that we went after was being agnostic. So you can point the data wherever you need, or you can output it, print out your report, or you can tailor it through the platform. So it's very straightforward. Usability was absolutely key. So very simple, and also the portability of, say, the data models. We've ensured that you could use it in any technology. So it's very, very straightforward. Very straightforward. I mean, I mentioned the Karma module we built in 4 weeks. I think that gives a good sort of time frame estimate. That's not a lot of time to get to something that is usable and delivers insight to the business users.
Thanks. And you can maybe just come back to this one if you got time after Matthew's and Neil's wrap up. It's just if there's just one takeaway that you'd want people to come away from this with, what would it be? But you may want to come back to that at the end.
It's stakeholders. It's stakeholders. People. It's bringing people along on the journey is the absolute fundamental, because the technology can do it. The technology's there. The structures are there. It's bringing people along on the journey on any digital transformation project. People are absolutely key in that. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that I've taken.
Thank you, Charlie.
Great. Thank you
as well. Matthew, time for a quickie?
Yeah. So just a closing question, really. Where do you think is the greatest level of opportunity in this tool?
Yeah. So in terms of that vision statement that we went back to, it is at that portfolio level, because it is about projects all into one place and then pushing down. So I would say that the greatest opportunity is, this is a system of systems based approach to performance control, and at that portfolio level, that's where the most value is realized, especially when we sort of talk to the business users in other organizations as well. That disconnect from sort of that portfolio level to the project level, this is where this is really trying to bridge that gap.
Super, that was great. Thank you very much.
Paul and Matthew, thank you so much for your highly insightful questions and your support for the programme generally. I'm going to thank you in a minute, Charlie. You've not quite off the hook yet, but you've done well and you've earned a rest. Just to say a few things to the wider audience. This is the first of 4 online events, and then there's 2 set piece conferences, which are already looking oversubscribed. Now, we really want to build momentum behind these events, and you can help us. So if you found it useful, A, come along to the next ones, B, bring a friend or 2. We can have as many as we like in these because it's virtual. If you attend all 4, you will be guaranteed a place, VIP place at the set piece conferences at the end, which, as I said, are already oversubscribed, but we're keeping some places back for our loyal followers. And you will be entered into a draw for a top-of-the-range iPad, just to take the technology dimension, just to reinforce that. Now, why are we doing all this? And I think Charlie's last 2 comments sum it up perfectly. So I'm just going to say them again and pretend I said them, not Charlie. We are in the business of culture change here. We have got some very hard-working people who've spent a lot of time and money, and the government have supported it through the IUK and DFT to realise some areas of innovation. But as Charlie said, these will not go anywhere unless we change the culture as well. And part of what we're looking for from this is not just lots of people ring up Charlie and buy licenses to the IICC, although that would be nice. We want to impact on that portfolio of 600 billion. And the slightly sort of lugubrious thing to say is, if we don't change the culture, somebody else will, and we won't like it. So I commend all of you who are in this business of culture change already, and those of you in the call who are part of that, and I suspect most of you, and please be our champions for this. There's plenty of scope. We're always up for challenge, as you've seen today. That is the nature of the work, is to be challenged, but we want to challenge the industry, because actually, even if this was the best IICC in the whole world, and I'm sure Charlie would say it probably is, but there's no point if people are doubtful of it. And it's people, to Kevin's point, it's people that will be the problem in this, not the demonstrators and the products. So that's really what we're aiming for here. So please, let's use these events and these outcomes as a catalyst for accelerating the disruption before somebody else does it to us. Now, just to help us get these right, there is a survey that will be emailed to you, and I think you can receive it in other ways as well. It's a short survey. Don't worry, it's not going to ask you your blood group. It's just really a bit about how we can make these better and how you give us a sense of what they've meant for you. So that would really help us. So in anticipation, thank you. I would like to thank all of you for attending and for asking some very pertinent questions. And most of all, we should probably thank Charlie, who's been on his feet for an hour and 20 minutes and hasn't wilted, and I think has given very good answers and a very interesting presentation. So big thank you to Charlie and to Costain for your input. So without any more from me, I think that's time. Let's call it a day there. Thank everybody again for attending, and have a good rest of the day.